Chuck Norris stopped his car for a $5 hug sign. You won't believe what happened next. It was a calm Sunday afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden beams across a quiet suburban street. Chuck Norris sat behind the wheel of his black SUV, driving back from a charity event he had just attended. His schedule was packed, and his team reminded him repeatedly that he needed to be at the airport within the next hour. But for a moment, Chuck allowed himself to enjoy the silence, the simple scenery outside, and the thought of finally getting some rest. As he approached a traffic light, something unusual caught his attention on the right side of the road. A teenage boy, no more than 14 or 15, stood alone near a small sidewalk. His clothes were slightly worn, his shoes dusty, and his eyes tired. But what drew Chuck's attention wasn't the boy. It was the sign he was holding. A piece of cardboard, roughly torn from an old box, with uneven handwriting and marker. Hug for $5. Help my MOM. Chuck's eyes narrowed. He slowed down instinctively. One of his security team members sitting beside him looked confused and asked, "Sir, everything okay? Should we keep going?" The cars behind them began to honk lightly, but Chuck didn't move forward. His gaze remained fixed on the boy. The teenager glanced up, noticing the SUV slowing down. For a moment, hope flickered in his eyes, but just as quickly, it faded. He had probably seen many cars slow down before, only to drive away. But this car didn't drive away. Chuck reached for the door handle. His team looked surprised. One member quickly said, "Sir, with all due respect, you don't need to get involved. It's probably nothing serious." Chuck glanced at him for a brief moment and replied softly, yet firmly, "Sometimes, the smallest signs carry the biggest stories." He pushed the door open and stepped out into the street. What Chuck did next shocked everyone watching. The street fell silent the moment Chuck Norris stepped out of his SUV. Even without an introduction, his presence carried a quiet authority, something that didn't need words to be understood. The teenage boy holding the sign looked up, confused. He squinted his eyes, unsure if what he was seeing was real. Chuck slowly approached him. The wind gently swayed the cardboard sign in the boy's trembling hands. "Hey son," Chuck said gently. "Mind if I ask, why a hug for $5? The boy swallowed hard. He looked around nervously, unsure whether to speak. A couple walking nearby slowed their pace, curious. A group of kids on bikes stopped, whispering. A woman in her car lowered the window, grabbing her phone to record. The boy hesitated. It's for my mom," he finally said in a cracked voice. "She's sick. We need money for her medicine." I didn't know what else to do. Chuck's expression softened. He had heard thousands of reasons throughout his lifetime. Excuses, lies, motivations. But what he saw in that boy's eyes wasn't trickery. It was desperation mixed with hope. "What kind of sickness?" Chuck asked. The teenager looked down at his shoes and whispered, "Stage 3 cancer. She doesn't want treatment anymore because we can't afford it." For a moment, Chuck didn't speak. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in shared pain. He too had known desperation at a young age. He had fought poverty, rejection, and doubt long before he ever entered the world of stardom. Behind him, his security team stood confused. One of them whispered, "Sir, we're going to be late. Maybe we can donate and leave." Chuck didn't answer. His eyes remained on the boy. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lucas," the boy replied. "How old are you?" 15. "And how much have you collected today?" Lucas weakly smiled and flipped the sign around. On the back was taped a small plastic bag containing several crumpled bills and coins. Chuck gently opened it and counted silently. $27, Lucas said softly. "Since morning." Chuck nodded slowly. It wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing either. It was effort. It was love. Cars now began slowing down. More people stopped to watch. Someone muttered, "Is that Chuck Norris?" Another voice answered, "No way, can't be." Chuck turned slightly and extended his hand. "Lucas," he said, "may I have that hug?" The boy looked confused, then emotional. He nodded and stepped forward slowly. Chuck leaned down and embraced him. Not quickly, not politely, but with sincerity. The kind of hug a father gives a son who has carried too much weight. That moment, people standing nearby couldn't hold back their emotion. A woman wiped her tears. Someone else whispered, "I wish more people cared like that." But Chuck wasn't finished. He stood up, turned toward his vehicle, and called out to his assistant, "Bring me my checkbook." The assistant froze. Sir. Now. He walked back to Lucas. I'll help your mom, Chuck said. Not with $5. Not with 27. With everything I can. Lucas's mouth fell open. He stared at Chuck, unsure if he had heard him correctly. His eyes filled with tears. But why? He stammered. Chuck smiled gently. Because sometimes, he said, a single act of courage deserves more than a $5 hug. Lucas broke down crying, clutching Chuck's arms. The crowd around them began clapping quietly. Chuck looked at him and added, almost in a whisper, You gave me hope today, son. Now let me give it back. If you saw a child on the street with a sign like this, would you stop? Yes or no? And tell me, from which country or city are you watching this video? Chuck handed his assistant the amount and began filling out a check. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Murmurs spread like waves. Is he really? That's unbelievable. People don't do this anymore. But Chuck never looked for applause. He simply asked, Is your mom home now? Lucas nodded. Chuck closed his checkbook. Take me to her. And with that, the world around them changed. The atmosphere around the street shifted from curiosity to silent admiration as Chuck Norris gently guided Lucas toward his SUV. The security team hesitated, unsure how to handle the situation. Chuck opened the back door himself and looked at Lucas. Come on, son, he said softly. Let's go see your mom. Lucas looked stunned. Are you really coming? Chuck smiled. I said I'd help. I don't make promises I can't keep. The boy nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. He stepped into the car nervously. Chuck followed, closing the door behind them. His driver and security exchanged bewildered glances before quietly getting in and driving off. The inside of the SUV was quiet. Lucas watched the city blur past the window, his thoughts racing. After a moment, he spoke. She doesn't like people pitying her, he said softly. Chuck nodded. Your mom sounds strong. Lucas managed a weak smile. She is. She always says, we may not have much, but we have each other. Chuck looked at him thoughtfully. Strength isn't never falling. It's what you do when life hits you hard. Lucas glanced at him then, really seeing him for the first time, not just as a celebrity, but as someone who understood. What hit you hard? The boy asked. Chuck's eyes shifted toward the passing horizon. Losing people I love, being ignored, doubted, told I'd never make it. We all fight battles. Lucas nodded slowly. That was the moment he stopped seeing Chuck Norris the legend, and began seeing Chuck Norris, the man. They drove through a modest neighborhood, with fading houses and narrow streets. Lucas pointed. That one. The blue house. As the car stopped, Chuck noticed a frail woman sitting by the window, looking confused as she saw unfamiliar vehicles pulling up. Lucas got out first and waved. Mom. She slowly opened the front door, leaning against the frame. Chuck stepped out, and for a moment, she stared, unsure if her illness was making her imagine things. Good afternoon, ma'am, Chuck said gently. She looked at Lucas, whispering, Lucas, who is? Mom, Lucas said softly, this is Chuck Norris. He wants to help us. Her eyes went wide. No, we can't accept charity. We're fine. Chuck walked slowly toward her and stopped a respectful distance away. It's not charity, he said softly. It's a little help from someone who believes good people deserve a chance. Her eyes filled with tears. But why? Chuck looked back at Lucas. Because your son would stand on the street all day just for one hug to save you. That kind of love deserves support. She placed a shaking hand over her mouth. Lucas hugged her tightly. Chuck reached into his jacket and handed her an envelope. She hesitated, then took it. Inside was the check, large enough to cover her treatment and more. It's too much, she whispered. Chuck shook his head. It's just enough. Silence settled. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. Just a mother, a son, and an unexpected hero. Lucas turned to Chuck. You didn't have to do this. Chuck smiled softly. Maybe not. But someone once helped me when I least expected it. And I never forgot. Before stepping back, Chuck glanced around the house, noticing its worn condition. Let's take care of this place, too, he added. No fighter should recover in discomfort. Lucas's mother broke down crying. Lucas hugged her tighter, and the boy whispered, You're our miracle today. Chuck placed a gentle hand on Lucas's shoulder. No, he said softly. You're the miracle. I'm just here to witness it. If you were in Chuck's place right now, would you step in to help or walk away? Tell me honestly in the comments below. As Chuck headed back toward the car, a neighbor peeked out curiously. A young girl across the street whispered, "Mom, that's Chuck Norris." The mother didn't respond at first. She just stared, stunned. Because that day, a legend didn't show his strength by fighting. He showed it by caring. The hug that stopped the crowd. As the traffic finally resumed, Chuck Norris couldn't bring himself to drive off immediately. Something about that moment, about that sincere smile from the little girl holding the sign, pulled him deeper into thought. He parked his car just a short distance ahead and stepped out again, not as the action hero the world knew, but as an ordinary man moved by pure human emotion. Behind him, a vehicle followed slowly. The couple from earlier, the ones who had been watching carefully, got out and approached Chuck. They weren't fans seeking a photo. Their eyes were filled with something else, respect. "Sir," the wife started softly, "the world needs more people like you. People who don't just walk past pain." Chuck acknowledged her words with a humble nod, still processing the emotional weight of what just happened. He looked back toward the little girl, now sitting on the curb with her bear, gently swaying her legs. Her father, holding the sign, stood beside her. Chuck approached them once more, his voice calm, but full of purpose. "I want to know your story," he said. The father hesitated for a long moment before speaking. "She's only 7, he said, rubbing his weathered hands together. "Lost her mom to cancer 6 months ago. I've been trying to keep her smiling. Didn't know what else to do, so one day she wrote this sign. $5 hugs. Not for money, just for comfort." Chuck blinked slowly, not just hearing the story but feeling it. The crowd around them had grown, drawn in by whispers. "That's Chuck Norris." He stopped traffic to hug a little girl. More people began pulling over, curious. Some recognized him. Some didn't care about celebrity. They were moved by what was happening. The father's eyes began to well up. "We're not asking for pity, sir," he said quietly. "We just wanted to remind people that maybe the world still has kindness left." Chuck finally spoke after a moment of silence. "No," he said gently. "You didn't remind people. You showed them." Suddenly, another car stopped. Then another. People got out and approached slowly. No one loud, no one disrespectful. A woman stepped forward first and handed the little girl $20. "I'll take 4 hugs," she said with a small laugh, wiping a tear from her eye. Soon, more followed. Some gave money. Some didn't. But one by one, each person approached that little girl not because she was charging, but because they wanted to give. To share that moment. To feel something real. The police officer from earlier, who had only been watching from his patrol car, finally walked over as the crowd grew. The tension that normally accompanies an officer's presence didn't exist here. He approached Chuck and spoke respectfully. "Sir, we're not supposed to allow roadside gatherings like this, but I think this one can go on a little longer." Chuck nodded, appreciating the humanity behind those words. He then turned back to the little girl and knelt down, looking directly into her eyes. "You know," he said softly, "in movies, I fight bad guys. But today, you reminded me that real strength is not in the hands. It's in the heart." She smiled shyly. "Do you fight sadness too?" Chuck's eyes softened. "Every day," he replied gently. "But today, I think you won." The gathered crowd fell silent, the moment sinking into everyone's heart. Have you ever seen a small act of kindness change someone's day, or maybe your own? Tell me in the comments. Your story might inspire someone watching right now. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, many wiping tears from their faces, a passerby whispered to another, "You know, that hug was worth way more than $5. And at that moment, Chuck Norris realized, sometimes the most powerful punch isn't thrown, it's felt. The day Chuck gave more than a hug. As the sun dipped slightly in the sky, casting a warm orange glow over the scene, Chuck Norris remained beside the little girl and her father. What began as one hug had opened the doors to something deeper, a quiet movement of compassion. People continued to drive slower past the spot, some waving, some honking gently in support. A few even parked at nearby spaces just to observe from a distance. But beneath the calm surface, Chuck sensed something else. A pang of sadness in the father's voice, an unsettled look in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. Chuck spoke softly. "You're doing your best. I can see that." The father let out a tired breath. "I am, sir. But things have been difficult. The hospital bills for my wife's treatment left us with nothing. I tried working multiple jobs, but I had to choose between leaving her alone at home or earning a living. When she passed, his voice broke. I didn't want my daughter to feel alone too. The little girl rested her hand on his arm, as if understanding far more than a child should. Chuck looked at them, truly looked. Fame had often surrounded him with luxury, security, privilege. Yet here, in front of him, stood two people with nothing except an unbreakable bond of love and resilience. He stood silent for a moment, processing. Just then, a man approached from the back of the crowd, wearing a suit, clearly someone of authority. "Mr. Norris?" he said, extending his hand. "I'm the director of a local news outlet. We've been filming from across the street. Would you mind if we covered this story?" The father looked startled. The little girl clung to his coat. Chuck responded calmly. "If it helps people see what kindness looks like, then yes." The director nodded and walked away. Chuck turned to the father again. But before any cameras start rolling, he paused, thinking carefully. "I want to do something." He stepped back toward his car and dialed a number on his cell phone. People nearby could hear bits of his conversation. "Yeah, it's Chuck. I need a favor. A quick one." "Yes. Arrange something for me. No publicity. Just help." He spoke firmly but respectfully, the kind of tone that only real leaders carry. Not loud, not commanding, but unshakably clear. A few minutes passed. Then Chuck walked back to the father and placed an envelope gently in his hand. The father frowned. "Sir, what is this?" "Hope," Chuck replied. Inside was a cashier's check with a large sum, enough to clear his debts completely and allow him to rebuild a life with dignity. The father froze. "No, I can't accept this. Please, we didn't ask for money. This is too much." Chuck placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I know you didn't ask. That's what makes you worthy. This is not charity. It's investment. In your future, in her future." Tears streamed down the father's face uncontrollably. He sank to his knees, overwhelmed. The little girl hugged him tightly, confused but feeling his emotion. Chuck knelt beside them. The world sees strength as power, but real strength is standing tall when life pushes you to your knees. Just then, someone from the growing crowd whispered, "Legends don't just fight battles, they heal hearts." Word spread quickly among the onlookers, and for a moment, silence fell over the entire street as people witnessed something that went beyond fame, beyond headlines. Chuck Norris didn't just give a hug. He gave a man his life back. If you believe kindness has more power than any punch, type hard in the comments. Let's see how many of you still believe in humanity. Chuck stood, helping the father up. The man looked at him through tears. "Sir, how can I ever repay you?" Chuck smiled softly. "Pass it on." In that instant, it wasn't the martial arts legend standing before them. It was just a human being, proving that the greatest victories are not won in the ring, but in the heart. The hug that broke the internet. Just as the emotional conversation settled, sirens in the distance caught everyone's attention. Another patrol car pulled up slowly, its lights off, signaling no emergency, just presence. A senior officer stepped out, noticed the growing crowd, and immediately sensed something unusual. He walked toward the group, recognizing Chuck Norris instantly. "Mr. Norris," the officer greeted softly. "Is everything all right here?" Chuck nodded. "Everything's fine, officer. Just kindness happening." The officer looked at the father and the little girl, then back at Chuck. His eyes landed on the sign still held in the child's small hands. $5 hug. Something about those words seemed to hit him too. He looked at the girl, hesitated, then took out his wallet. Without saying a word, he handed her a $5 bill and knelt. "Can I have a hug too?" he asked gently. The crowd watched breathlessly. She nodded shyly and wrapped her tiny arms around him. A man in the back whispered, "I've never seen a cop do that." And that moment, caught on dozens of phones, became the spark. The director from the news outlet, who had been recording quietly, signaled his cameraman. A reporter stepped forward and asked Chuck if he could say a few words on record. Chuck looked down at the little girl, then at the crowd. Sure. A mic was held out. The cameras rolled. Chuck took a deep breath. "People often ask me what strength is. They think it's about being able to hit hard." He paused, glancing around. "But today, I learned it's about being strong enough to care." The little girl stood beside him, clutching her bear. "This hug cost $5, Chuck continued. "But its value is beyond any price." The father wiped tears from his eyes. The officer stepped back respectfully. A few people in the crowd began to clap softly, Then more joined, until the applause echoed across the street. Chuck continued, his voice calm but resonant. Some fights happen inside us. Some people battle quietly every day. If you're watching this, remember, you never know whose life you can change with a small act of kindness. The reporter lowered the mic. People watching from their phones had already begun sharing the moment before the interview even finished. Within minutes, social media started exploding. Chuck Norris stopped traffic for a little girl's hug. Real hero. This is the most beautiful thing I've seen today. Faith in humanity equals restored. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag hug that healed. Hashtag real strength. Hashtag Chuck Norris heart. Hashtag $5 miracle. Within 30 minutes, local news picked it up. Within 2 hours, major media channels were showing clips. By evening, international TV networks were running the story. Hollywood icon stops car to embrace child holding $5 hug sign. Moment goes viral. The first video posted hit 1 million views in 47 minutes. The father's GoFundMe, created quietly by a bystander, crossed $50,000 in under an hour, eventually surpassing $500,000 by midnight. Messages of support flooded in from around the world. Chuck didn't post about it. He didn't advertise it, he simply went home. Later that evening, in the quiet of his living room, he sat watching footage on the news. He wasn't looking at himself. His eyes were focused on the little girl's smile. He whispered to himself, maybe the world still remembers how to love. Where are you watching this from? Comment your country or city. Let's see how far this message of kindness travels. People began replying from across the globe. Karachi, Pakistan, respect from here. Toronto, Canada, cried watching this. Dubai, humanity wins today. Sydney, Australia, this restored my belief in good people. The story was no longer about a martial artist. It had become a movement. By the next morning, the world had seen the hug. The story reached millions overnight, shared by celebrities, leaders, athletes, and everyday people. Not as just another viral moment, but as a powerful reminder that compassion still exists. News channels across Asia compared Chuck's gesture to his greatest movie moments. European journalists called it the most impactful hug of the decade. In the Philippines, Manny Pacquiao himself tweeted, "Legends don't show power. They show heart. Salute to Chuck." Even the official UNICEF page reposted the video, captioning, "If every child received one moment of care like this, the world would be different." The following week, Chuck quietly visited the family, not with cameras, but alone. The father had managed to rent a small apartment and was already making plans to start a local support program for widowed parents. He greeted Chuck with deep gratitude. "You didn't just help us," he said softly. "You helped me believe again." Chuck smiled. "Then don't waste it. Build something beautiful." He turned to the little girl, who ran up to him holding a new handmade sign. Crayon, free hugs, because love doesn't need $5 anymore. Chuck knelt, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I hear that's the most expensive thing in the world now." She giggled, hugging him tightly. This time, there were no phones recording. Just a moment, pure and real. Days later, Chuck was invited to speak at a community event inspired by the incident. The organizers expected him to talk about martial arts or his career, but he surprised everyone. Taking the stage, he said, "I don't want to talk about fists today. I want to talk about kindness." The crowd leaned in. Strength is not shown when you're on top. It's shown when you lift someone else up. That hug did more than years of action scenes. It reminded me, and the world, that human connection is the greatest power. A long pause. Quiet. Reflective. Then, thunderous applause. I hugged a man who makes people brave on TV. But he told me I was the brave one. Her journal entry went viral too. The father began organizing kindness corners in different cities, spaces where people could offer hugs, share stories, or simply help someone feel seen. The movement spread under the same hashtag. Hashtag pass it on. Chuck never sought acknowledgement, but his act was remembered as one of the most genuine demonstrations of humanity shown by a public figure in years. If you believe kindness is stronger than violence, type respect in the comments. And if you think the world needs more stories like this, hit subscribe and share this video right now. You might be the reason someone chooses kindness today. Because sometimes, the greatest punch is delivered by the heart.